Alright, so we are on the play here. And this is a one-lander that we can't really keep. No traverse, it's also a fortified village, so let's go ahead and send this one back. And we'll hope for something better than this. And this is a hand that we are going to keep. It's not going to matter too much what we see on top, because we are going to be traversing here. So even though it's a land, which we do kind of want to land, but we want to, I think we want to traverse for it here. Although if we just naturally draw the plains, there is something to be said for that. I was definitely thinking it didn't matter, but I guess we do want this land. Alright, so taking back what I said, we want the plains on top. So I'm going to keep that. And here's an island from our opponent. Not clear what that's going to mean for us. But the nice thing about this is we didn't need to spatial contortion this turn. So we can always traverse for a waste and then spatial contortion if we want to. Alright, so here is... Alright, our opponent's got Island Mountain. Very interesting. So we can't play the Hedron Archive right now. So I like just attacking with the Servant. And then we have the option of whether we want to traverse here. We can save the traverse and try to hit Delirium with it. Or we can just traverse right now. And I like just traversing right now a little bit more, just to get our lands into play. And if our opponent gets rid of our Servant, we're going to be really happy that we made this play. So no matter what, we're going to have access to at least 4 lands on our turn. And here's an Anticipate. So it looks like some type of control deck, most likely. And here's Dynavolt Tower. So the jig is kind of up. Our opponent's playing a blue-red spells type of deck. But we can just jam our Nissa here. That's the main threat in our hand. That's the card that we're hoping can just beat our opponent down as quickly as possible. So we're going to play Nissa and pass. And it's our opponent's move. So with this second island, our opponent's definitely representing counter magic. Could be a possibility. So we can start with a vessel. And then I like continuing on here with the Hedron Archive. We'll see if our opponent wants to counter it or not. Looks like the answer is no. So we can just get in there with both of our creatures, and now we're set up to, if we want to, we can ultimate our Nissa next turn. And we've also got this fast clock going. So our opponent hasn't done a ton yet. Here's a Glimmer of Genius. Okay, so that's gonna put a couple of counters here onto this Dynavolt Tower. But our opponent's all the way down to 6. So we're really just going on the aggro plan. We're not really thinking, just going plus Nissa, plus Nissa, plus Nissa, and hoping that's going to be able to kill our opponent. Although we did draw a land, so we want to give some consideration to playing a slower game here too. But it's going to be hard for our opponent to beat these 5/5s that the Nissa creates, and if we tick down Nissa, it is a pretty big risk. Just because we're no longer, our Nissa can then pretty easily die just to the Dynavolt Tower. So I like leading off by sacrificing this vessel. And there's a tireless tracker. Okay. That's pretty solid here. So, yep, I think we just force our opponent to have something. So let's go ahead and make a 5/5 and move in for what would be the kill. Now our opponent very likely does have something here. We'll see what that might be. So it's going to be a galvanic bombardment on the forest, which means that our opponent can now activate the Dynavolt Tower. And it looks like that is what the play is going to be. So activate Dynavolt Tower to get rid of the forest. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And our opponent conveniently still has 3 mana up, representing a counterspell for this Tireless Tracker, which is pretty scary. So I think our best bet might actually just be to cash in our Hedron Archive this turn. And now we drew a Ruin in their wake. That's a pretty good draw. So we can try to bait out a counterspell here by just casting the Ruin in their wake. And it looks like our opponent didn't go for it, or just doesn't have the counterspell. One of those two. But our opponent went down to 4 here. So look, okay, here's a catalog. Okay, so the catalog is going to allow our opponent to loot through, and we see a Revolutionary Rebuff discarded here. Alright, so another Dynavolt Tower, up to 10 energy here, it looks like. So that's a lot of energy. But traverse the Ulvenwald. We could do some really good work with traverse here. So we could traverse for World Breaker. That seems pretty good. We could also get Emrakul. So I like casting it here. I think we want to just go for the World Breaker, actually. Because we're able to cast it right now. Although I guess technically we could have cast Emrakul by using Nissa, but we're locked into this line. So we can go ahead and go after a Dynavolt Tower here. And now we're going to try to just kill our opponent. It's as simple as that. So we can go ahead and plus the Nissa. And we'll see if our opponent has something like another copy of Galvanic Bombardment. It looks like instead it's going to be Harness Lightning. So that's pretty good, but we still have this. We still have the Nissa, and now we also have a World Breaker. So it's hard to see exactly how our opponent gets out of this. Although the Dynavolt Tower activation does help. Kind of regretting not casting the Tireless Tracker earlier. Still feel pretty good about where we're at. The Anticipate's gonna put our opponent up to 2 energy, and okay, so we were able to take that one down, and we're playing against a really interesting deck. So we're playing against blue-red Dynavolt Tower, so let's go ahead and sideboard here accordingly. So we want to be boarding in a bunch of threats, cards like Tracker. We didn't see really creatures out of our opponent. So hard to deal with threats like Nissa. Thought Knot seems good. Natural State can get rid of those Dynavolt Towers. And then we can take out our creature removal like Descend Upon the Sinful and Spatial Contortion. This Servant of the Conduit we can also board in if we want it. Although we might actually not want it, just based on where we're at right now. The Servant does die to a lot of removal, like Bombardments and Harness Lightnings that we saw already out of our opponent. So, gonna go ahead and submit this. And we are going to be on the draw here. And once again, our opponent's on the mulligan, but we are also going to be mulliganing. And this is a tough hand, but we're kind of forced to keep it, even though it's only a one-lander, because we are already on 6. And we get a scry out of the deal. We're on the draw. Optimally, we find waste, so we can go Ruin in their Wake. Unfortunately, it's a Traverse. This is a really interesting card to see on top, because if we top it, it is going to slow us down, but it is also a land, essentially. The fact that we can't cast it immediately, though, makes me want to put it on the bottom. So I'm going to do that. Even though it's greedy, not going to lie, putting that on the bottom is greedy. We might just not draw the second land, but we really want to have two untapped lands on turn 2, and if we just get that Traverse and then Traverse off the Canopy Vista, we are not able to do that. Now we're also potentially not able to do it here because we drew Fortified Village. A little bit awkward, but we'll see. We'll see what we pick up here. So it's a Gideon. So we're playing a little bit of a slow game, but we have this natural state. So if our opponent just jams Dynavolt Tower, we have a nice clean answer to it, and we can move on from there. And we've got Gideon. I don't know how exactly our opponent plans to deal with Planeswalkers, because the answers we saw, our opponent was never really able to get that Nissa off the battlefield, and that was ultimately what did most of the work in the last game there. So yep, here's the Dynavolt Tower, and I like just going ahead, not messing around, and getting rid of it right away. And we can cast Ruin in their wake here. We could also play the Servant. So it's between those two. But I like going with the Ruin here, because the Servant's just more vulnerable to opposing removal. Main phase Anticipate. This means that our opponent's probably looking for lands, and we see that Wandering Fumarole there. And also probably does not have a counterspell. This would have been a great time to have drawn that land that we wanted, but unfortunately we did not find it. So one thing, even though we have the waste, we can Ruin in their wake here. Simply get a basic land and put it into our hand. And that way it's not tapped. We can play it as our land for our turn, and then follow up with a Servant. So I like that the most out of the options we had available to us. So we have to remember Revolutionary Rebuff. We have to think about other counterspells our opponent could have. So just jamming Gideon here, it's definitely risky. And we could definitely have a few options, but our opponent's got 5 cards in hand. I kind of like playing the Hedron Archive out first. So because that's kind of our plan, I like attacking with the Servant. So yeah, just playing the Archive out, and if our opponent counters it, they counter it. If not, that's also fine. But we have to realize that our opponent does have 5 cards in hand. We might actually just want to play Gideon here to use up an opposing counterspell because our opponent likely has Glimmer, but you can argue back and forth about that. I think I would rather play the Archive first to get around potential revolutionary rebuffs. And, okay, so there's a Void Shatter, so clean trade there. Our opponent did have the counterspell, and don't really mind it that much. Now we can go for this Tireless Tracker since we picked up the Evolving Wilds, and we have protection from Revolutionary Rebuff. So we're able to get the clue, and we can just pass here and use the Servant to pop a clue, or we could attack and save the energy. I think there's definitely arguments to both plays, but I like having the Servant available to us here. So just gonna pass the turn, and we'll see what our opponent opts to do here. Alright, so there is a bombardment. So we can respond by getting that clue, that extra clue, by sacrificing our Evolving Wilds. So we're going to get a clue, and then we might as well crack one of the clues and make our opponent spend an additional energy to kill our tracker here. And it looks like, bang, exactly when we wanted it. 4 card types in our graveyard for the Ishkanat we just picked up. So tons of options here. I think we actually want to go with Gideon though. It plays around rebuff. It does not play around negate. But Gideon's pretty hard to deal with. And there's the negate. Typical. But we can traverse here. We can traverse here if we want to. And I think we do want to. And now the question is, what do we want to find off of this traverse? So we've got Worldbreaker. We've also got Thought-Knot Seer, which we could just get Thought-Knot Seer and go after our opponent's hand. I kind of like that. And just save some of our bigger creatures for later. So I am going to find the Thought-Knot. And our opponent's just passing the turn. So now we can go ahead and attempt to play the Thought-Knot. And so it looks like this is going to happen. So we're able to see what our opponent's working with. And it's a doozy of a hand here. So double Harness Lightning, double Torrential Gearhulk, and then a single copy of Summary Dismissal. So the Dismissal is definitely quite good. It's able to answer any of our cards 1 for 1. So I think we get rid of it, especially because it stops our Worldbreaker. On the other hand, we might not cast the Worldbreaker right away. And the Gearhulk is definitely, undoubtedly more powerful than the Dismissal. I think it's a close decision. I'm going to go with the Dismissal, though, and take the more aggressive approach. Now, I would expect our opponent to want to Harness Lightning away our Thought-Knot here. So, yep, we're seeing that Harness Lightning right now. And that's going to be used to get rid of our Thought-Knot Seer. Our opponent's going to be able to draw a card. And now the question is, what do we want to do with this Servant of the Conduit? Because we know about that additional Harness Lightning, I kind of like not attacking with it and just going ahead and drawing another card here. So we picked up a land. And there's a take inventory, and our opponent had another one, so our opponent's now up to 5 cards in hand. That's pretty good. It's a lot of cards. So I think this is, once again, the time where we want to just go for our Nissa. Seems like we're pretty much locked into this line. And that's actually going to do it. Our opponent just can't beat the Nissa, it seems. And we also have the World Breaker here in case of any potential Gear Hulks. So this Nissa is just going to cause our opponent to concede. Interesting. Alright, that's going to do it.